Dishonorable Mention is brought to you by 813area.com. 813area.com is the place to go to see where to go and what to do in all of Hillsborough County. Whether it's the best events, the newest restaurants, or where to be in Tampa Bay, 813 Area is your resource for everything happening around town. For the latest on where to be in 813, check out 813area.com. Dishonorable Mention is now on social media. Follow us on Facebook, and we're at Dishonorable Pod on Twitter too. Next week, we'll start taking questions from Twitter because y'all have been an amazing part of this. Thank you.
How do you think Jane Castor will do as Tampa's new mayor? Is sex education being properly taught in our schools? And can an online quiz with non-political scenarios determine your politics? Welcome to another episode of Dishonorable Mention. I'm Ernest Hooper, columnist with the Tampa Bay Times, and as always, joining me is Dr. Carla Mastracchio, communications specialist.
Woo woo! What's up?
State Representative Chris Latvala.
Hello.
And community activist Becca Teeter.
Howdy.
How you guys doing this morning?
Well, how are you doing, bud?
I'm walking on sunshine as always. So, how do you think Jane Castor is going to do as Tampa's mayor? Let's start with that one.
I think she's amazing. She's going to rock it. I mean, I saw her at the Junior League Luminaries Award luncheon on Friday. And I mean, she just came in like a total rock star. She was late so Grayson did the introductions or whatever. And then he was like, oh, I guess she's not here yet. So he just kind of went on with the programming. And then she walked in and everybody was like, oh, there she is. And we gave her a standing ovation, and she was pretty awesome. And I love her sense of humor. She's definitely gotten more dynamic, and I don't know, she's gonna rock it. I love her. She's great. Go
Chris,
Jane.
what do you think?
I think she'll do real well. I think she will continue the momentum that Mayor Buckhorn started in his 8 years in office, and I think she will continue to do a lot of the same things that he did.
Becca?
You know, I had the privilege of seeing her 2 days after the election at an Athena luncheon, a group that we're both members of. And it was really nice talking to her and hearing her point of view. A lot of progressive folks do have some concerns about some of her history with people of color. And I think she's addressing that early. And I hope she continues to be mindful of the city at large. But as far as being qualified, as far as being in a position to be a great mayor, I think she's ready, willing, and able. And there is no perfect candidate. You know, my one thing I know for sure is the purity test is a dangerous one. So we all have opportunities to improve, but she's definitely tested and ready to go.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting. The city, Chris, you mentioned the work done by Mayor Buckhorn. Certainly there's been a lot of progress in the city, but now we have people in neighborhoods outside of downtown, outside of the Channel District, who are asking, what about us? When are we going to begin to see the ripple effects of the improvements that have come to downtown and the Channel District in Tampa Heights? And it's going to be incumbent upon Mayor Castor to bring those about. So I think that's going to be a challenge for her. I think Tampa is at a crossroads where it's really going to emerge as a big city, but somehow it has to retain some of its small town charm. And when I say that, I mean that somehow it has to make sure this rising tide lifts all boats, and people in East Tampa and West Tampa and other parts of the city don't get left behind. So to me, it's going to be a very interesting tenure for her. I don't think it's going to be, with all due respect to Mayor Buckhorn, I think he stepped in at a time where the economy was rebounding and enjoyed largely smooth sailing. The waters may get a little rougher for Mayor Castor. All right. So what else you guys want to talk about today? We were kind of delving into how sex education is being taught in our schools and what needs to be emphasized, what isn't emphasized. Becca, that's kind of your field of expertise, given that you go around the college campuses and talk to college students about sexual empowerment. What do you see on the horizon in terms of that category?
Well, I think we have an opportunity to do something really good here that can make a huge cultural impact. And I believe in comprehensive sex education starting as young as possible. But part of the issue is I would say easily, and after surveying several 100,000 students, 75% of them come to college with no understanding of what consent is. So we're failing our students. And whether or not you choose to engage in sexual activity or not, an understanding of it is a life skill. And so I think we need to start introducing stuff at a very early age. And we were joking earlier about not teaching kindergartners to put on condoms, and that's not what comprehensive sex ed is. It's understanding boundaries. It's understanding autonomy. It's also learning that your body is just your body and your body parts, a penis is a penis, a vagina is a vagina, an elbow is an elbow, and they're just parts. But we also need to not just teach biology. We need to teach and talk about the social emotional effects of intimacy.
Yeah, context is super important. So I think teaching sex ed in the context of, real life scenarios that kids are going to go through when they reach maturity or even before maturity, so they know how to handle themselves and they know if something happens, they know who to tell. I think that's really important.
How do you explain to kids, though, about the emotional attachment, the emotional investment that comes with engaging in a sexual act? Do they see it that way? Do they attach emotions to it, or is it just a physical act for some teenagers?
I think they do. I actually had an experience talking to a kid. It was like at a weird scenario. It was at a debutante ball like 2 years ago. And I was talking to a bunch of these high school kids about sex because they asked me. And they were like, when should we do it? And I was like, I am not qualified to more champagne. So, and my husband was like, I gotta go get a drink. And he's like, you're on your own, kid. So, I was kind of talking to them and I was like, I think it's when it's right for you. And I think as long as your partner is consensual, then you have this, great agreement. And then you decide to do this when you're ready. But you don't want to wait. And I told them this, I'm like, you don't want to wait unless it's religious or some sort of, thing bars you from doing it. You don't want to wait too long either, because then, you don't know how to handle yourself at, if you wait till you're like, 50 or 60, that's a problem. If you have sex at like, 13, that's also a problem. It depends on the person. It's very situational. So I don't know, do it what's right for you, but don't wait too long and don't have sex too early. I think there's a middle ground. I'm not saying 50 or 60, but you know what I mean.
Well, and we have a problem because parents don't know how to talk to their kids.
Right.
So this is something that perpetuates generation after generation. Yeah. And that is where we really need to fix things. And so much of that is shame and stigma, and that it is absolutely a normal thing to engage in sexual contact with another human. It is not normal to convince somebody to have sex with you. That is an unhealthy practice. But it's okay to engage in sexual contact. But you need to have ongoing conversations about this. And the reason, when I work with parents, I talk to them and I say, start talking to your kids about their bodies when they're too young to even compute what you're saying. Because what you're doing is you're building skills. So when there are real questions, it's not so scary for you, because it's terribly frightening to think of your child as a sexual being. But don't think of them as a sexual being. Think of it as part of their human being self. And
their growth. I think that's really important because, you don't want them to have sex really, really early. I think that's really detrimental. And also really late is detrimental. Whatever's right for them at their growth and development, but it has to be consensual. I think it has to be with somebody who's, not going to take advantage of them or abuse them or anything like that. They have to know what those situations are and what that means.
Chris, did your parents talk to you about sex when you were a teenager?
Yes.
They did, really.
But
I'm somewhat surprised by that.
Is if there are any parents listening that are having struggles talking about the birds and bees with little Johnny, give us a call and we will send over Becca to your house and she will explain it to your kids.
Yeah, don't send me. I suck at that.
I have so many friends that are like, you're going to help me tell my kids, right? like Aunt Becca's sitting around the table having those conversations.
Did your parents talk to you, Becca?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, from a very early age and age appropriate. And one of the most quintessential moments of my adolescence, I remember I was in second or third grade and I checked out the book, Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret.
Oh, I love that book.
It's and they're
so
making it into a film.
I know, so good.
Which has to do with women starting their menstrual cycle and puberty and things of that nature. And I came home, like, I'm reading this thing, like consuming it. And I remember my mom coming home. My mom, ardent feminist, first senior vice president in banking in the state of Florida, just really a rock star. And I remember her coming home, and this is so 80s. And she comes home, and I'm like, girl, I got some questions for you. And I probably didn't say girl, but it makes for a better story. And so I start talking to her about this book, and she literally, I remember her, like, again, think shoulder pads. She pours herself a glass of scotch, and she had such
I love this so much.
Right. She had such an open, honest conversation with me that I felt educated. I didn't feel awkward. I didn't feel embarrassed. And it was just really, it set a tone in my house going forward that we could always ask questions, and that door was always open. And that continued through very quintessential parts of our life for both myself and for my brother. And I think that has really helped pave the way for me to do the work that I do. That being said, my best friend and business partner did not have a lot of that growing up. So even if you're listening and you think, oh my gosh, well, I didn't have that as a kid, I'm in trouble, I can't talk to my children. Absolutely not. It's never too late. But as a parent, if you want the road to be easier, start early.
Yeah, my parents were not that detailed. I think my mother was like, hey, there's this and there's that, but don't do any of that until you get married. And then my father, I was either junior or senior in high school. And it was like right before the prom. And he was taking me to the airport because I had flown down to see him that weekend. And I could tell he wanted to talk about something, because he was very quiet. And I remember, like, yesterday, we were on the Courtney Campbell Causeway. And he said, so has your mom talked to you about, like, sex stuff? I said, yeah. He goes, okay, so I guess I don't need to talk to you then.
I feel like your life was like an 80s after school special because
so,
like right before the prom, like that's the scene.
So there was, I learned from MTV and my friends and, all that kind of stuff.
Well, and sometimes your friends can be a great source and well-educated, and sometimes they can't. But your experience, there's like 5 different ways that people learn about sex education in the home. And one of them is in a car ride. Usually they're en route to it's like clockwork. They're en route to a sporting event, like whether
we
it's
did a lot of that too.
A soccer game, because I think parents do that because it's a controlled amount of time, and then they don't have to stare at their child after they drop them off. And I really think it's parents' fears and insecurities that stimulate that.
And in his defense, because he might be listening, I do think he might have said, well, if you have any questions, let me know. But needless to say, in the 20 years plus since then, I haven't
this
had
has
any
not
questions
been...
to ask about.
My parents never talked to me, and I'm glad they didn't talk to me. I didn't want to talk to my parents about sex.
Yeah, I'm with
didn't.
you.
Well, you had that hot tub club. And
I was going to say, I'm sure in the hot tub, I'll talk about it quite a bit.
Not that much, actually.
Less talking.
But and I had some conversations with my sons. I don't think they were anything that you would use as an example. And also...
But you didn't talk to your daughter?
My wife said, I'll take care of it.
See, and I think that's a mistake.
And I was fine with that. Now, I talked to my daughter about relationships and how she should expect to be treated by a boy. But talking about sex, no, my wife was like, I got it. Don't worry about it.
See, I think it's really important, especially...
And let me tell you, I'm good with that.
But again, that's your insecurity. I think it's really important for the most important male role model to have these conversations with a female identified child. Just like I think it's really important that my sons get good information that is congruent from both parents, because it helps shape the way they think about how a man is supposed to talk to them or how a woman is supposed to talk to them. And so that's what I encourage parents to do. Now, there's always going to be a parent that's more comfortable in that wheelhouse, and let them take the lead. But I just think that it should be, if it's a 2-parent household, I think they should all be included in the process, because I think it really makes for stronger, healthier conversations. But you said you talked to your daughter about relationships. That's a huge part of it. You don't need to explain to your child how to connect genitals and which to make. Like, that's not so much.
And I'm not going to.
Well, but and that's okay. But more than anything, it's about, feelings and emotions and consequences and understanding and confidence and feeling good about the choices that you make and knowing that they're your choices. Like,
That's a big part of it, is knowing that they're your choices and being able to own your choices too.
100%.
I think that's a big, and understanding consent, especially when you have, alcohol and drugs involved, and that's, that blurs things a lot. So being able to kind of navigate those waters is really, really important.
I remember when you and I first, Becca, you and I first became friends, and we would talk, and you asked me about, and it wasn't like a gotcha question, but it was, what does consent mean to you? Because we were talking about what you're doing. I was asking what you do professionally, and you're explaining the college seminars that you do, and I think my answer was something along the lines of, like, if you're in the act of kissing or making out or whatever, the absence of a no would be like a yes. And whatever answer I gave you was completely wrong, and then you explained to me how I was wrong, and that, like, numerous steps along the way, you got to have a yes and all that kind of stuff.
Well, and that's the thing, is that we have these preconceived notions, but none of us, you're a fully actualized adult. Allegedly. No, I'm just kidding. No, but again, we're still evolving. And Carla talked about alcohol. People use alcohol as a social lubricant because we don't have the confidence to say, hey, and ask people if they're into it, or we don't want to feel weird or act like, there's just so much social pressure, and it's such a dangerous practice. And it's one that predators rely on.
And I, that's one of the rules I have, is if there's alcohol involved, I don't mess with that person.
Well, and I think that's wonderful, but that's
not reality for a lot of college students and a lot of high school students. Like, they want to drink to get blacked out. Well, they can hook up with people because they don't want to. Yeah, they want to black out because they don't want to have those moments of choice, because they question their choices, and they don't want to have that moment where they're really figuring out, okay, what does this other person want? What do I want? And it's really scary. I deal with this all the time as a college professor, and my male colleagues think I'm weird because I'm like, people don't come to me and talk to you about this stuff. And I'm an advisor for a lot of different college organizations, and young women and some young men do come talk to me. And it's really scary, some of the situations and some of the things that come out of their mouth. Like, it really is really scary. Like, there was this time where I was advising a group of young women, and they were talking to me about their friend, and she blacks out, and I guess, sleeps with different people or whatever. And I'm like, well, did she consent? And they're like, well, yeah. And I'm like, how do you know that? And they're like, well, isn't she just asking for it? And I'm like, no, that's not really how we want to talk about it. Let's talk about that. So I tried to use that as like a teachable moment, but it's hard when that culture is so set of, like, blackout culture and hookup culture. So it's just hard.
And in our society, particularly pop culture, socializes those acts in a very different way. I can still hear Jamie Foxx singing "Blame It on the Alcohol." We send you. We can have these conversations with our kids, but our culture is sending a very different message about sex, alcohol, drugs, and how kids should handle it, which leads some people to preach abstinence, to preach waiting until you get married. We used to have a writer at the Times, Arlene Spenceley, who wrote about how she was saving herself for marriage. And it was actually some thoughtful pieces she put together. And it wasn't about not having sex education. She believed in that, but she also believed in just waiting.
But see, that's somebody who is empowered to make their own choice. And that is the absolute best outcome. there is nothing wrong. I would never shame anyone who makes the choice to wait until whatever that moment is in their life. But it needs to be our individual choices, and we need to know why we're making them.
Yeah, it has to be their choice. And the choice is like the key word there. I think that's, empowering, but it's also really important for them to understand. Like, we can say it's a choice, but they need to understand that they can make choices. Like, we can talk about this all day, but until we have conversations that actively affect people who are making those choices and not just talking around them and about them, I think it's going to stay the same way. And it's sad because I feel like people like Becca are really great because they go into schools and they, really talk about making those choices and empowering people. But
and it twofold. One, when you have these conversations, young people can report childhood sexual abuse so much more because they understand the difference, and it makes grooming children very difficult. And two, there is absolutely abstinence should be a choice. It just should not be only abstinence, only education. We have seen in every bit of credible research that when you have abstinence only education, what you end up with is a skyrocketing sexually transmitted infections and a skyrocketing unintended pregnancies. And so,
or you have people that get married when they're super young,
right?
Because they're taught that you can't, not to have sex outside of marriage. So then you get married when you're 18, 19 years old to the first person you fall in love with. And then within 5 years, you're divorced. And that's happened to some of the people I went to school with growing up with. And, I was taught to, abstinence, first and foremost. And for a large part of my life, like, that's what I abided by. And without going into my personal life, I think that if you get married for a large reason so you can have sex without sinning, then that is very much counterproductive because you're not ready emotionally to get married, and it's not you necessarily aren't picking the person that you should be picking.
I think it's different for everybody. I think it's whatever, but it's finding that journey, like whatever's right for you. I think some people can be fine and get married at 19. Some people are fine losing their virginity at like 65. It's whatever's right for you. I don't think that there's like a formula for like one person, but I also think that not engaging when you're ready, regardless of what end of the spectrum you are, is really detrimental to your development as a whole. But I'm also not a psychologist. Like, I just deal with college students a lot. So I speak from the experience I have by seeing them grow and develop.
Yeah. And they come to college wholly unprepared to deal with these issues overwhelmingly. And the one statistic, and I don't like to get stuck on statistics, but the one statistic that always helps me convert parents into having these conversations with their kids is, I believe it's 76% of fourth graders have seen pornography online.
I believe that.
So if you don't have those conversations before then, which, number one, you still have the greatest social capital with your children, and number two, they're going to get it online, and I'm confident it's not in the manner in which you want your child to learn.
Someone's going to bring a cell phone to school. Someone's going to bring something in. I mean, that's just how the world works when you leave your kids at school. I mean, you entrust other people to take care of your children, and other kids also take care of your kids by, teaching them important socialization stuff. But sometimes it can go the other way.
So, and I have a funny story for y'all. In fifth grade,
oh, here we go.
At Parkwood Heights Elementary School.
Oh my God, you were probably Florida, adorable.
During lunch, I had a friend named Jeff who's talking about condoms.
Oh no.
Oh. And we're all laughing, so I'm laughing too. I have no idea what he's talking about. And so we all got sent to the principal's office, and get in trouble. And so as the principal started talking to me, she realized I had no clue what a condom was because I was in the fifth grade. So I did not get in trouble with the rest of them.
That is adorable. And I would love to see a fifth grade Chris.
I was a cute kid.
I'm sure you were adorable.
Short and skinny.
When I was in eighth grade at my Catholic grade school, one of the students who shall remain nameless because he has since passed away, so I won't indict him. But he did unroll a condom and throw it in the girls' bathroom while the girls were getting dressed for PE. At my Catholic grade school, there wasn't like a locker room. There was just the bathroom where the girls would go change. And they screamed hysterically when he threw the condom into the bathroom, and we all thought it was funny. but I have to confess, like I kind of knew what it was and what it was for, but I don't know. It was still a little hazy on the actual application. But we knew it would scare girls, and we thought that was cool.
I feel like on this episode we might have to have people sign permission slips before they listen to it.
No, I think
an advisory at the beginning.
This requires an advisory. This is one thing that unifies all humans, is that we are all biologically conditioned to engage in sexual contact. There are some people who identify as asexual, but they still are equipped, in which, if they so choose, to engage in sexual contact. I think it's really normal and healthy, and I think that this is a really good space. Like I want people to talk to parents as much as I do their kids.
And that's why if you call us, Becca will come over to your house and have a talk with your kids.
Yeah, I mean, you were so funny. Like, my sons are going to talk to me about it. Well, it's your profession. Of course your sons are going to talk to you about it. I mean,
but they're still my kids.
You go around with a deck of cards that say sex versations on it.
Yeah.
You're the
You
perfect
literally
mom
have them
to
in your
talk to
purse.
your
I grew up
kids.
talking politics with my dad. Your kids are going to be talking sex
We talked
stuff.
about that too. My parents gave us the tools in which to grow into this society. I can't tell you how many people I had friends in high school who were having sex, and I was really worried they were going to end up having an unplanned pregnancy. I made appointments for them to the health department and would literally drive up and down 66th Street, taking them to the health department because they were scared to talk to their parents, but they weren't going to stop having sex. And I thought, okay, well, then we need to get you in a position where you take charge of your human sexuality.
Yeah, I don't remember a lot of kids at my high school having sex. I must have ran in a different crowd.
Yeah, you must have.
I mean, I remember the first time that I ever got to second base, I was as nervous as could be. And,
Oh, Chris, this is
Last
very
week
sweet,
was
but I'm
very tough for
uncomfortable.
Chris.
I'm very uncomfortable right now.
and Sixpence None the Richer was playing in the background. I remember that.
1998, really? Huh.
Yeah, I told you I was
Weird.
I was a late bloomer. So I was
1998,
like 17.
man.
But were you a late bloomer, or was that just a part of your ethos because that was what you thought what your belief system was?
Well, I mean, that was part of my belief system. And granted, a lot of kids that, I hung out with in high school were like the Christian crowd and like kids from the youth group and, things like that. So that's what we were taught. But even like the other kids, I do you
know how many people I know have had sex on youth group trips?
Oh, a lot. That's
It
a big
is.
one. Yeah.
The back of the
bus.
van. Yeah.
I remember
Don't
that.
ever let your kids sit in the back of the van.
Youth groups are you a part of? That's
conversations.
gross.
Yeah, I remember
Ew.
playing Truth or Dare, and you would just hope that you'd get dared to kiss the girl sitting next to you, and then when you would,
I would Lysol that.
yeah, I mean those were some fun trips.
Ew.
Yeah.
And then you'd play Never Have I Ever.
Oh, we would play that. That's
Yeah.
fine. But no,
No,
not doing anything in the back of the van. That's gross.
I was gonna say I don't know if everybody at my high school was I'm older than you guys, so I'm kind of surprised to hear you say that. But I know everybody was talking about having sex. Whether they were telling the truth or not, I don't know. But everybody said they were, especially all the guys. I mean, there would just be these macho conversations where everybody was talking about what they did and who they did it with and who they're going to be with and blah, 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 blah. And, I was sitting in the back kind of quiet.
Well, I will just close with this. So we just finished writing curriculum, and one of the people we worked with brought to our attention, we were addressing consent in a meaningful way. And we asked people to define consent. And one of the things we omitted doing was we didn't ask people to originally define sex, because how people define that, can be very, very different. And that can depend on religious beliefs, that can depend on your gender, that can depend on sexual orientation. And so we thought we've added that to the curriculum now because we think it's really important that people understand and can self-define what sex is to them before we ask them to understand consent, because someone may see that very, very differently. It's kind of like when you talk to your partner and people are like, how many people have you been with? Well, some people only count certain activities, but they may all carry the risk of sexually transmitted infections. So it's learning to talk to your partner or prospective partners about how to keep yourself safe, how to understand what your values and boundaries are, and also removing the shame and stigma, but not removing personal responsibility.
Yeah, and if the sex act didn't occur in the continental United States, it doesn't count.
That is correct. Just kidding.
Everybody knows
I wasn't
that.
paying attention. I just looked up from my phone. I was like, wait, what?
Yeah, like if you're outside of the continental United States, it doesn't count.
We were on a break.
If you're on the Caribbean island, that doesn't
I'm
count.
going to go back to looking at
What
my
if
phone.
you're on a cruise with somebody who threatened to fly home from the Bahamas? Because that actually did happen to me one time.
You have a lot of stories you have not shared with us,
Chris is
Christopher.
like, yeah, he has a lot. That's a whole other podcast, though. I feel like you should have like your own
Yeah.
kind of thing
Chris
going.
will never do a podcast on his dating stories.
Oh, yeah, I wouldn't either if I were you.
Yeah,
For
some
sure
of them
not.
are
No.
not pretty.
Yeah. If you're a fan of Dishonorable Mention, make sure to also check out Ralph the Lawyer podcast here on the 813 Area Podcast Network. Starring a second-generation Tampa attorney, Ralph Guido makes the law easy and accessible for people, as well as anything but boring. With a menagerie of guests and his staff, Ralph and friends talk about everything from employment issues for women to whether or not you should cooperate with the police during a DUI check. It starts about the law, but it's way more fun and interesting than a statute book. Subscribe in iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever else you get your podcasts.
All right, well, let's talk about the survey on chartsme.com that uses a series of non-political scenarios to determine your political ideology. It was really interesting. I think we all took it. Some of the questions included you had to answer whether you strongly disagree or strongly agree or somewhere in between on questions like, I might be willing to try eating monkey meat under some circumstances. It would bother me to be in a science class and to see a human hand preserved in a jar. It bothers me to hear someone clear a throat full of mucus. Now, how they use these non-political scenarios to determine your political ideology, I'm not sure, but we each took it. Chris, how did you score on the chartsme.com?
I was
quiz?
a 59% Republican.
Becca?
60% Democrat.
Carla, where were you?
52% conservative, 48 liberal.
I don't even feel like I know her anymore.
I know.
I feel like
Who are you?
I
Questions
feel like y'all are a
weren't.
bunch of freaks. Because I answered that I didn't like all the, carrying the dead animals.
Okay, that
or, like,
question was
seeing a
very
hand in
misleading.
A jar and
I don't understand. I mean, like, whose hand was it? Was it like, a human rights victim? Was it like a murderer? Was it someone famous? Was it like, somebody from this horrific situation? Was it a cadaver? Like, we don't know whose hand is this and why is it in the classroom? Context matters.
And which one of y'all said that you would carry a dead cat?
Okay, and that's another thing. Context matters. So, like, if I had a cat that, passed away in a loving home, I would, obviously carry it. But if it like was in the street with its like intestines splattered all over the place, I mean, that would increase my disgust factor exponentially.
So, speaking of story time, Kent, who's one of our faithful listeners,
I
from
love him.
Orlando, had a cat in college. Had two kitties. And he called me one day, and this was right before I moved in with him. I was living at an apartment at the time. Called me because he sat on one of the kittens underneath the chair.
That is my worst nightmare.
And I guess heard the squeal or whatever, so he called me, and I had to declare death on the little kitten.
That is the saddest thing
And
I've
that
ever
was the
heard.
time that I was like, I had my best friend chops that day. Cause I don't even remember if I moved it. I may have moved it with like a shovel or something, but I had to look at it.
That is the saddest,
And
horrible,
he
horrific
was pretty
story.
hysterical.
I would have been hysterical too. That's my worst nightmare. I have small dogs. I mean, I'm so careful when I sleep, on the couch or like I'm with them. That is horrific.
All right, so
Oh my God.
here's how the survey works.
It's a terrible Monday. Like, what are you trying to do to me?
I just feel so different about Kent now. I don't know.
He had two kittens when he was in college.
I don't
That
know
he's a
I
cat
can
murderer.
Continue. I
It
don't
was
think
an
he meant to.
accident.
I mean,
So
I would never
if
forgive
I
myself.
murder one of my kids by accident, is it suddenly excusable?
By definition, it's not murder if it's by accident.
Yeah, it'd be manslaughter, right?
It would be manslaughter.
I don't know.
I would feel
I'm
terrible.
going to
Is
that
really
kitty
think
slaughter?
differently.
He committed kidney slaughter.
I would never forgive myself. I would probably have to. I would never. I mean, I can't.
All right, so here's how the chartsme.com survey works. It's based on a 2014 study that concluded that people who were more prone to disgust are more conservative and tend to align with the Republican Party. Some scientists believe it's ancestral and that the adverse reactions were used to protect primitive ancestors from contamination and disease. The study measured participants' brain response to disgusting imagery using an MRI. The study could predict party affiliation with up to 98% confidence. The questionnaire on chartsme.com uses the disgust scale in lieu of the MRI and imagery, so results are likely far less accurate. So there it is. Republicans are disgusted by everything, and Democrats aren't disgusted by anything. Now we know.
Well,
Agree or disagree?
I agree.
I'm still stuck on the kitten thing. I don't know. My day is ruined, so it's fine. Whatever.
You have derailed Carla's morning with that story. Censor yourself, young man.
I thought it was interesting. I mean, I think it came up pretty accurate. Carla's right down the middle.
Yeah.
You and I are further left. And
I'm the only sane one of the bunch.
that's what people say about you.
Yeah, that's not right. I
No.
don't think you're telling the truth.
I would say that was fairly accurate. I thought I'd be a little more liberal. I was 55-45. I was hoping for a 60. But yeah, maybe that is accurate. Maybe I am a little more conservative than I envision myself, which is probably true. Speaking of, I'm supposed to be in favor of the Hillsborough County Commission, now controlled by Democrats, raising taxes to help provide services. And I was telling Chris, I think it might be an overreach. They're considering a number of tax hikes, but just because you can doesn't mean you should. And, they went, I think, 18 years without having a Democratic majority on the Hillsborough County Board of Commissioners, and they may end up losing it if they raise taxes too much. What else is going on?
Well, I have a comment from a listener. This would probably mostly go to Chris. I'll share the whole comment, and then y'all.
A member of your family.
No, it's not. I don't know this person. It's on our Facebook page. They said, I may have missed this one, but maybe why Jordan's Law wasn't heard in the Florida Senate, or if y'all talk about all stuff, how about the Rays and the upcoming college football season? Where shall we begin?
Let's talk about Jordan's Law. I wrote about that in my column last week. I thought it was a huge disappointment that it didn't at least get a hearing in the Senate after passing unanimously in the House. Chris, that was a bill you sponsored that would have created more safeguards for child welfare system. Thank you. What went wrong? What happened there?
Well, the way that the committee structure works in both the House and the Senate is about the first month of the session, subcommittees can hear bills and pass out bills. And both the House and Senate version had 3 committee stops each. And the House got finished with their committees hearing Jordan's Law the middle of April. And so all 3 stops happened before then. In the Senate, the first committee that it was in, it didn't get heard until a month into session. So it didn't get heard until the beginning of April. And it just coincided with the fact that that chair had something and had a project in my K through 12 education budget that was near and dear to her heart, which coincidentally pays her a 6-figure salary. And she didn't hear Jordan's Law until a week after I released my budget, which was week 4 of session. And so then she heard it in that committee, and then it got heard in the following Senate committee a week or 2 later. And then it never got heard in the third committee. And part of the reason why it never got heard in the third committee was because the first committee held it up for a month for no policy reasons whatsoever. Me and that chairman don't necessarily see eye to eye on a lot of issues. I don't like her, and she doesn't like me. But I never envisioned that she would, somebody who claims to, be a supporter of kids, and what she does in her professional life is helping kids, that she would use a bill designed to help kids as, some sort of payback or politics. But it didn't pass all three committees. So there is a procedure in which the rules chair can pull a bill out of committee and bring it directly to the Senate floor. Either the rules chairman can do it, or really any senator can do it. But there has to be a supermajority that approves to waive the rules. And so when Jordan's law was stuck in the Appropriations Committee, they weren't going to have another hearing. So they would have had to been pulled out and have the rules waived, which the Senate chose for whatever reason not to do that the last week of session. And they did that. They waived the rules on several bills, including bills that would help different lobby organizations or different industries. And so and then after the fact, they said that there was some legal questions to the bill, which in the House, there was numerous lawyers that looked at the bill and would give advice on how to make the bill better and stronger, including DCF and FDLE, who I work very closely with on the bill. And so every step of the way, we would amend it, according to the advice that I would receive from somebody. And so that was nonsense. And then the other objection that they said after the fact was that there was a fiscal impact to the bill. But in the House bill analysis, both FDLE and DCF said that there's up to $1 million fiscal impact on them, but that they both could absorb that impact within the staff they currently had.
So you're convinced this wasn't about policy. This was about political gains.
Not. And I mean, it was about politics. And, I would have people that would go to different senators to ask for help. And it wasn't necessarily, they weren't necessarily lobbying on this bill, but they were doing it as a favor for me. And based on the reactions from different senators that they said in private, it was very obvious to me that that was the case. There were several bills that I had that they killed, which is fine. I mean, that's part of the game. But don't do that on a bill that's designed to literally keep kids alive. And so now I'm going to spend, the months leading up to next session calling them all out. And if next year they want to say, well, Chris was mean, so we're not going to hear his bill, then so be it. I'll just keep calling them out. And, the House, especially Representative Chris Sprouse, who's in line to be our speaker in 2 years, helped me tremendously with this bill, and as did Speaker Leva and others. And there were other budget priorities that I had. One for Directions for Living, that they do a baby cap program designed to help intensive reunification for children under the age of 6. That had they received funding last year, Jordan Beliveau would have been a client of theirs, but they didn't receive funding last year. They did in previous years.
And to our listeners, Jordan Beliveau is the 2-year-old Largo child whose mother left him for dead in a wooded lot in Largo, Florida, and he ended up losing his life. And she's now facing charges.
Right, and that's what the bill that I did was designed to help kids exactly like Jordan Beliveau. The 4 parts of the bill were related to the report that DCF did in response to his tragedy. And so I did a $250,000 budget request for them. The House had it in during budget conference, I think at $250. The Senate had it at $100 and never came up from the $100,000. But both presiding officers in the House and the Senate have what's called a sprinkle list or sprinkle pot, where they have their own money that they can fund projects at the very end. And so Directions for Living will receive a couple $100,000 this year for the baby cap program that was funded because Jose Oliva used his own pot of money because the Senate would not fund it. And I believe that wholeheartedly that, number one, it was a project that my dad had previously funded, so they knew it was important to them, and also they knew that I was the House sponsor. And so, that was just another case where they can say whatever they want to, but I know for a fact that, it was personality driven and politics related, and heaven help them if a kid dies in Florida, because I will be blaming specific senators if that happens.
So forgive me for my naivete, but is there any chance you can patch up your relationship with this certain senator who blocked the bill?
I was not going to. I waited until after session because I wanted to give them the benefit of the doubt. I wasn't going to start blowing them up during session and calling them names or whatnot. But some of them, if they pass the bill next year, I'll probably thank them, but that'll be about the extent, because I don't think that. And also another thing during budget conference, Representative Sprouse had to fight hand and fist to get money for child welfare workers in the Tampa Bay area, because the Senate knew that it was a priority of the Houses. And so, I'm not going to bend over, and thank people for doing something that they already should be doing. Child welfare is at a crisis in the state of Florida. Some senators that work with children should know that child welfare is at a crisis.
All right. Well, let's wrap up things. I think, as always, we have a Florida man story. Chris, do you have a Florida man story for us?
I do, and it's actually a good one. Not as good as the one that Becca sent us the other day about the Florida man that got arrested for having sex with an alligator, which would have been appropriate for our sex chat today. But this one is from May 13th.
Obviously, his parents didn't talk to him about sex.
Yeah, no. This is from May 13th, 2018. It's from Daytona Beach, and it says cops... naked Florida man prompts airport evacuation after claiming he planted a bomb. And that happened in Volusia County. So,
how could a naked man plant a bomb? I mean, he's naked.
But it didn't say that he planted it on himself, did he?
No, he planted it in the bathroom. So maybe he went to the bathroom, took off all his clothes, and then put the bomb there.
And now weighing in, our esteemed producer, Colin. What's going on, Colin?
Guys, it is good to be here. It's nice that I can actually have a day where I can be in the same room with you guys at the same place at the same time. Having to do this from a distance is no fun, and having to listen to you, I miss everything. Chris, I have a question for you, though, buddy. Is there any chance we're going to get a special session this year?
I don't foresee one. Okay. The governor... could call one for any reason, but I haven't heard that we would have a special session. Is there a topic in mind that you are thinking of?
I know that passing the gambling compact was one of the things that was sort of mentioned as possible special session material. And then I want to know what you think about this. I feel like we're going to be the third largest state in the 2020 census, and we still run a legislature 60 days a year. And you make no money, basically. You are basically donating your time for a very small compensation salary. How can we get you guys to work more so that we're not rushing through bills at the end, and so bills like Jordan's Law can be appropriately debated and funded? Because I think if we're not on a 60-day legislative session, there's no way that doesn't pass,
But I think, and this happens on both sides, so I'll give the Senate the benefit of the doubt in saying that there are important bills in both chambers that the other chamber will hold hostage till the very end. And then that's when all the horse trading happens. And then in the last 2 weeks of session, everything gets accomplished or a lot of things get accomplished. And that's why we're there, past 11 o'clock, the last couple of weeks of session.
Your ongoing destruction of the K through 12 public school system. But that's a topic for another podcast.
Oh, I'm so depressed.
Hey, the governor was in town last week. I was in St. Pete with him at Mount Moriah,
celebrating their great educational accomplishments.
That helped all the kids that
don't get back to starting.
I can't believe you went into a church. I'm surprised God didn't strike you all down just for misusing their holy place for what you've done to public education.
There was a bunch of parents there. There was the kids, wonderful kids that were there to thank us. It was a great time. And then there was Republicans and Democrats celebrating.
But
our success. There were a couple Democrats there, Becca.
Who?
Don't give me that.
Who?
Representative Newton spoke at it. Also, there was
I asked
Senator
for
Rouson.
Democrats. Okay. Again.
Ooh.
Well, they're in short supply in Florida
Representative
anyway.
Newton is a friend of mine,
I know.
but he is a staunch Democrat. He does what he believes, and and most of the time he isn't with us on education. On this particular bill, he was, but there were also more Democrats that voted for the school choice bill than Republicans that voted for the Guardian bill. There were 6 Democrats that voted for the school choice bill this year, including some in Tampa Bay.
But
We're going to have to delve into that on the next podcast. Colin, wrap us up.
Yeah, I just real quick. Do you think that we should go to a longer session? Do you think that we should spend more days in Tallahassee, pay you a better salary, and maybe more priorities would be more well thought out, and things would be like a mutual friend of ours? I was texting as she was in the gallery, like watching you guys vote, at 11 o'clock at night, and it's insane, this process right now.
We do have committee weeks that typically start 3 or 4 months before session.
Right.
Sometimes those weeks get canceled, or the meetings are pretty basic, and not a lot gets accomplished. But I think even if you look in Washington, they don't do stuff until they absolutely have to, until they're up against the clock. And so I don't know if a longer session would mean that more gets accomplished, because I think this past session, I think the legislature did a pretty good job, and I think the governor did an excellent job.
I'm stunned that the member of the Republican Party would think that they did a good job.
give us
knock me over with a feather.
Yeah, I was a B/C student, so I'd give the legislature probably a B this past session. The Senate gets a D, as in dog, but the legislature as a whole gets a B.
That means you get an A if you're grading on a curve for the House.
No, because I didn't get Jordan's law passed, and so
and that's crazy.
And that was my number one priority. And next year it'll be my number one priority. And so
we'll see what happens.
All right, so I'll leave you guys with this. The Social Security Bureau goes through every year and determines what are the most popular names in the United States. This year, the most popular name for girls is Emma. And Becca, do you know the most popular name for boys?
I do. It's Liam. And I need all of our listeners to send good energy to Liam, because his team has made it to the championships on Thursday night. And let's bring it home, Rangers. Liam, number 1 in baseball, number 1 in names in the state this year.
And we're going to be there on Thursday.
We are.
Can we say where it's going to be at?
Too.
Yeah.
At the Safety Harbor Little League?
Safety Harbor
I'm
Little
going to
League.
be there with my sign and ready to heckle some 10-year-olds on the other team.
All right. Yeah, they don't know who they play yet. The other team, Liam's going in undefeated, so the tournament is tonight. But everyone is welcome. Anyone who shows up, my treat at the concession stand.
All right.
Nice.
I'm getting my order ready.
All right, well, that's going to do it for another episode of Dishonorable Mention. Thank everyone for joining us, and we'll catch you next time.
And also thanks to the Attic Tampa here on the 4th floor on 500 East Kennedy for hosting us. We're going to open this up to folks here at some point so that y'all can swing by and possibly see these folks that either be here or somewhere else out in the community. But again, thanks to the Attic Tampa for.
Yeah, I had a great breakfast this morning from the Attic.
That was pretty good.
I mean, I eat here probably 3 days a week because my office is on the first. We're on the 4th floor. My office is on the 1st floor, but this place is fantastic. If you don't know where it is, it's got a great view of the city going out over here. So come on by 500 East Kennedy Boulevard, and thanks to them.
All right.
Bye.